Hello, dear friends. We are sincerely happy to welcome you again. Today we will talk with the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Hello.
Igor Mikhailovich, on behalf of our viewers, thank you very much for the previous meeting, for the video on how to build strong and happy relationships. You know, we thank you so much for reminding us once again how important it is to love each other and how important the true catharsis, this absolute honesty and openness between the partners is. Because the system is certainly always aimed at separating people through thoughts. And in the previous video, you said that what the system foists into everyone's head can destroy even the strongest relationship, even the strongest family, if it is kept silent and not voiced. While exactly at the moments of exposure, all these scenarios of the system stop working. The demon doesn't achieve a result, and we take away power from the system. As you said in the previous video, thus we squeeze out that mosquito. And such victories are very important, especially when both partners follow the spiritual path. In the previous video, you also emphasized that no matter how the system tells a couple that they will come and enter the spiritual world together, everyone still follows the path on their own. This path is individual. In this regard, here is the first question our friends have asked. Is there an essential difference between the spiritual path of a man and a woman?
No, friends, there is no difference. Both a man and a woman follow their own way, and a lot of things are identical.
Well, we also received another interesting letter. They say that followers asked their Oriental teachers which path to God is better, the path of bhakti, of love and devotion, or the path of jnana, of wisdom and knowledge. Some teachers say that for female-type souls, the path of bhakti, meaning of love and devotion, is more suitable, while for male-type souls, it is easier to follow the path of jnana. But still, they are like two wings of one bird, so eventually people sort of achieve the same goal anyway. And the question is the following: is there a difference in approaches for men and women on the spiritual path?
You know,
Do men and women feel differently on the spiritual path? In other words, are there any gender differences?
differences.
Yes, in matters of saving one's soul.
I'll tell you right away, there are none. Absolutely none. The first thing I would like to note here is a male-type soul and a female-type soul. But who invented this? People. After all, it was invented by people who are very far from the spiritual world and who never had any real experience. Why? Because the soul has no gender. And I'll tell you even more. An angel has no gender. I mean, you, my friend, whatever your gender is, God grant that you come to God and enter the spiritual world, and you will have no gender. This is really so. Yes, a certain imprint remains, so to say, whether a person was a woman or a man in this world.
Subpersonality.
It 100% remains on subpersonality. That's where everything manifests itself. The differences are enormous, but that is for subpersonality, while for personality, there are none. When it becomes an angel, after merging with the soul, the gender disappears. What is left, I would say, is not a character. It is such a slight tinge. The female tinge is actually more tender, more loving, really, more feminine, whereas the male type is actually more coarse. Therefore, there are these small differences. These are the ones that remain. In angels, as a certain character trait, let's say, they also have their own character and everything else, of course, since individuality is preserved after all, but there is no gender distinction. And by and large, so much is made up in respect to this issue. People say that men are more serious, less emotional, whereas women are frivolous. They have a lot of emotions and so on. However, even scientific research that has been conducted disproved it all. Everything is exactly the same. This is really true. The only difference is that a woman, well, her femininity manifests itself more in taking care of the offspring, the family. Women are more inclined to that. After all, why? Because from childhood, they are brought up in such a stereotype, right? Men are less attached than women, let's say.
Are women somehow more responsible in that respect?
Yes, and a sense of responsibility is much higher in women. Men are less responsible. Again, I mean, purely in regard to family relationships. Otherwise, what difference can there be? If we take the spiritual aspect, then a woman is actually closer to God, no matter how you twist it. Why? Because a woman is able to produce Allat, while a man is not. And that says it all. But here, again, does Shaitan attack a woman or a man more equally? But his attention towards a woman is more intense. Why? Because she is a source of pure energy. A man is actually a source of anti-Allat. So he is sort of less appetizing. But nevertheless, a man is also subject to the same attacks and in the same number as a woman. Is there a big difference? By and large, there isn't. Such ideas are more contrived and fantasized. And again, yes, we do have certain differences. Men are more resilient. Well, in general, as the world formed, a woman took care of the hearth at home. She cooked meals, looked after children, whereas a man ran after a mammoth and brought food to the house. So he had to be more resilient, physically stronger, and so on. But a woman, in fact, has to be a lot smarter, gentler, more cunning. That's an integral part of her too. Why? Since she is physically weaker, it means that she has to be intellectually more developed, and that's really true. Well, let's just say that the highest IQ in the history of humankind has been recorded in a woman, not a man. Isn't it true? It's just that women are not allowed to develop the way they are supposed to. Let's say. And this is because, as people say, women are sort of hormonally unstable or more prone to panic or something else. But aren't men prone to panic? Well, there are women who are like rock, and there are men who are like wet rags. So,
And these differences, as it turns out, are they more at the level of primary consciousness?
yes, of course, secondary consciousness is absolutely identical, absolutely.
It has no gender.
Of course, it has no gender, just like the soul. Personality has no gender either, and it is really so. Deep inside, we don't care. Why? I will just explain. We conducted a series of experiments using hypnosis techniques, and a person who is a man easily perceives himself as a woman, or who is a woman as a man. I mean, there is no difference. This exactly highlights the fact that personality perceives itself uncritically and changes itself easily. We, as personalities, do not perceive ourselves entirely as a woman or a man or whatever. This is really true. Whereas primary consciousness is exactly this main, so to say, evaluator, and our self, one of several selves, which distinguishes us according to gender, according to instincts of adaptation, and, let's say, survival by virtue of one's abilities. Yes, this one clearly differentiates. Meanwhile, primary consciousness, as we know, friends, is that which emerges together with our physical body, and it really identifies itself as either male or female. But is it capable of changing its opinion? It is. I mean, due to the modern propaganda of this gender change, a lot of people succumb to it. Let's say, again, because of what? Because of pridefulness and a desire to attract attention, make people follow a certain imposed fashion. And people easily change gender. It seems to them that while a man, they somehow become a woman, or vice versa.
That nature has made a mistake.
Of course, there are cases when there are really, let's say, hormonal imbalances, and you cannot understand whether it's a man or a woman. Also, there are cases when, for example, there is domination of a subpersonality, whereas for subpersonality, I'll say it again, there is a clear division. That is, a woman remains a woman and a man remains a man. There is no body. But everything else is very clearly observed. And here's an important point. When a subpersonality capable of domination gets into a man's body, and that subpersonality seizes, let's say, the body, consciousness, or replaces secondary consciousness, that's where problems begin. Why? Because a woman becomes dominant in a man, and vice versa. But that's if there is an active, strong subpersonality. Then you cannot argue with that. A person can perceive oneself as an individual of the opposite sex, so to say. But I would attribute this to the unhealthy category. Let's say, to a disease, to put it carefully, because it is not personality. It's not a person's choice. It is something imposed on a person from the outside. Well, in this case, from within. It doesn't matter, but this is imposed.
Personality is simply weak.
Quite right. In this case, it is necessary to develop personality and not to succumb and not to surrender to the captivity of a subpersonality. Otherwise, a slave of this subpersonality is already formed for subsequent reincarnation.
Igor Mikhailovich, you mentioned that a woman is sort of a tidbit for the system because she is a carrier of Allat.
Definitely.
But due to what does an attack of the system occur? Because we were asked a question. After all, the system actually sends the same number of thoughts per day to each energy structure, say 60,000 thoughts, as we know.
I agree. It's a quantitative equivalent. It's like spam, spam that is sent through the internet, and a certain amount of it comes to people's mailboxes. The point is that the attention of the system itself, that a woman attracts, is much higher than that which a man attracts.
At the level of this very energy exchange.
Absolutely right. Therefore, out of, let's say, those very 60,000 thoughts that come in, there's a larger number of power impulses, meaning those thoughts which contain power and are capable of imposing themselves, like real spam. When you are bombarded all around with things you don't need at the moment, let's say, right?
Mosquitoes attack more voraciously.
Right, but here, the woman wins again. If she possesses certain techniques and spiritual experience, then naturally, this is an advantage for her because it's an additional power that she can obtain from Shaitan himself, taking his power and directing it into the spiritual world. This is really wonderful. For a man, it's harder to do this, but it is also possible. After all, the attacks are definitely coming to him as well. During the day, there are several dozens of power impulses. So there's a chance too.
We were also asked the following question: do men and women feel God's grace and love differently in those very spiritual practices?
Absolutely identically. But a woman has a brighter experience. Her path is shorter. Moreover, she is the source of Allat herself. So it's easier. Well, on the one hand, it's easier, but as we just said, the power attacks are higher in their frequency and power. So everything is balanced. Everything is just balanced. Let's say, does anyone have any advantage? No one has it. Let's say, everyone's starting position is the same. This applies to people of different types, as well as to men and women. Everyone is in the same conditions. Why? Yes, women are stronger spiritually, but they are more attractive to the system. That is, Shaitan is more concerned with them. Hence, the conclusions should be drawn. Men are attacked less, but they are weaker. Spiritually, the chance is higher.
You have also touched upon the subject of human types, because indeed some people who regard themselves, let's say, as the first type, say for you who are the third or the fourth type, it is actually much easier on the spiritual path. But is this really
I
true?
have a question. Who prevents the first type from becoming the fourth? Nobody except Shaitan. Who actually determines of what type a person is born? The presence of a more developed primary consciousness, nothing more. But there is a pattern in this case. The more developed primary consciousness, the less developed secondary consciousness. This is a pattern. And this person will be more selfish, more prone to consuming alcohol, drugs, and the like. The question is, why? Because he cannot fulfill himself sufficiently to the extent that consciousness has drawn for him what he should be like, because the whole world revolves around such people. Not they revolve around the world, but the world revolves around them. Whereas the more developed secondary consciousness is, the more a person realizes that it is he who should revolve around the world.
He's flexible.
Of course, he has higher adaptability and all the rest. And, as a rule, people with a dominant primary consciousness end up badly. Why? Because they are egoists, very resentful and poorly developed intellectually. This is really so. At the same time, they are quarrelsome and cause discomfort. Well,
Capricious.
Yes.
Yes, like children, a center of the universe.
They remain children. Why? Because it is that very child who is more developed and who is indeed, sort of infantile, as they say. A grown-up person, but he is infantile and behaves like a child. This is exactly what we are talking about. A person may even seem to be intelligent, but excuse me, he's a fool, such a paradox. This indicates precisely that his primary consciousness is more developed.
It is a very important reminder. What prevents one from advancing from one type to another?
Nothing.
That is along the spiritual path, because many people forget that it is possible to change this type of consciousness.
Of course, it is possible. Moreover, it is easy, my friends, if you have desire and aspiration. Again, the goal determines everything. If a person really has a goal, and his goal is spiritual development, he can very quickly turn from the first type, let's say, into the fourth one, and attain spiritual liberation. That's true.
Another thing, Igor Mikhailovich, regarding the following imposed stereotypes in society, like we've said that one of the stereotypes is that women are more emotional, while men are sort of more emotionally stable. There is also such a belief that verbal communication is very important for women, that they are more talkative, whereas men are more reserved.
More quiet?
More quiet.
Again, consciousness draws an image of a man, tough, calm, self-confident.
That in relationships too, in the evening women want to talk, whereas men would like to spend that evening in the family, in silence, maybe in tranquility.
I'll tell you from my experience, and any normal person will confirm this, men are more chatty, more inclined to discuss someone or something, you see? The only thing is, yes, there is a difference. Women can talk for a long time about their hairstyle, about their appearances, about some trifles, about clothes, and so on. Whereas men are less inclined to that. They talk more about some external toys. Why? Because a woman is more focused on her appearance. She is always
an image.
Yes, she creates an image because, excuse me for such an expression, she's sort of, how to put it carefully in marketing terms? Well, she offers herself, let's say, and she does everything to attract more attention to her image.
A good marketer.
Yes, let's say, a woman is like a self-absorbed marketer. Let's put it carefully. Men are also preoccupied with themselves, and very much preoccupied, but they lack patience. This is really true. As for who is more chatty, well, it's exactly the same. I wouldn't say that a woman is more chatty. Again, let's examine the situation where these myths came from. A woman is often at home, let's say, whereas a man is at work. He chats with someone all day long, comes home. His tongue already hurts. He has chatted enough. But it's the first person a woman has seen in a day. Does she want to talk? Of course she wants to. From here, let's say this myth originated that a woman is chatty.
When you said...
Because a man comes, he is serious.
Yes.
He is back from work. He comes and keeps silent. He is tired. He has chatted all day long. But a woman talks to a living person for the first time. And she's a chatterbox, huh? And if we look from a slightly different perspective, then a person who is among people, he uses different methods to attract the attention of another person. I mean, he himself gives his attention and takes it away from others. That is, he is in a balanced state, while a woman who has been at home doesn't have it. Therefore, she will do anything to attract attention to herself. Precisely this pursuit of attention is what makes a woman a marketer, who is constantly concerned about standing out from the crowd. Right? Isn't it true, friends?
And the interesting thing is that it is so important for consciousness to know what another person is thinking about. Whereas when people follow the spiritual path, this moment of verbal communication disappears for the most part. Does communication go into another plane, into the plane of energy exchange?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't. It all depends on people, on their habits, and many other things. In fact, people who don't even follow the spiritual path, but have lived their whole lives together, being side by side, they have the same thoughts. And, let's say, old, married couples are more silent. Why? Not because they have nothing to talk about. There is something to talk about, but simply because the system already perceives them as a single whole. So, the same thoughts come to them, almost as a single whole. That's why, to talk about something particular for them, they begin to talk about the same thing at the same time, to the point of ridiculousness. This is why all kinds of myths emerge. You see? In fact, well, again, regarding who talks more and how, who and what kind of attention, we are all the same. There are no particular differences here between a man and a woman anyway. You asked a question whether they will talk less when they follow the spiritual path or not. If they are busy with spiritual practices or prayer practices, let's say, they are a little bit distracted from each other at this time, but afterwards, they still start. Well, it's a natural reflex. Let's say, subconsciously speaking the language of psychology, to chase after other people's attention. They still do that, even if people are on the spiritual path. Whereas if they become developed spiritually, that's a different thing, friends. I mean, people who already achieve a certain level of spiritual development. I'm not talking about free people. It's completely different there. But already, a high enough level. When they have a direct interaction with the spiritual world, when they live by God's love, when they are filled with it, well, that's different. Certainly, those people are already more silent. Why? They have less verbal communication, so to say, but they have more of a nonverbal communication. But here, we're already talking about the phenomena that take place already at the high stages of spiritual development. Consciousness tends, let's say, to fantasize. You see, what we are describing now. Married couples will also start saying, we are already so spiritually evolved that we communicate non-verbally already.
We don't talk to each other.
Well, in this case, a different physics is operating, which has nothing to do with the spiritual, but actually has to do with the fact that Satan perceives them as a single whole. Well, this also happens, friends.
Igor Mikhailovich, can there be a spiritual leader in a family? It is often said that the man is saved through the woman or the woman is saved through the man, but in general...
I'll put it this way. Behind any successful man, there is a smart woman. That's true. But it has nothing to do with the spiritual. You see, if someone starts preaching spirituality, this person simply forgets about oneself. This person falls and drags along the one whom he or she supposedly undertakes to teach. The spiritual path is a constant learning. I emphasize, a constant, personal learning. I mean, it is constant work on oneself. It is learning, learning, and again, learning. In other words, these are people who embarked on the spiritual path and chose spiritual development for themselves, once and for all, and it never ends. Even after gaining spiritual freedom, a person continues to develop spiritually. This is really so. And it's very interesting. There are always new horizons. Well, that's not the topic of today's conversation. We are actually talking about preaching spirituality. This manipulation, there's no other word for it, comes precisely from shaitan. When a person himself doesn't develop, for example, a common interest has appeared, or a new whip has appeared in the hands of the manipulator, and that's it. And he starts taking care of the spiritual development of his partner. But does he himself develop spiritually at this time or not? Yet,
knowing how the system works in another person as it seems to him,
absolutely
but
right.
not in himself, unfortunately.
Friends of mine, there's a simple formula, and it says that every person is an individual, and he follows his own way. It's impossible for two people to step in the same footprint at the same time. It won't work. No matter how close they are, and no matter how spiritually close they are, when everything is right and everything is beautiful at the highest level, still, everyone follows their own way. This is really true. And preaching on the spiritual path is what people invented. They are exactly the ones to say that there is a female-type soul and a male-type soul, that those are the two wings of one bird, such beautiful fairy tales for fools. Or, I'll put it simply, beautiful fairy tales for future subpersonalities. I think this makes everything clear. The spiritual path is simple. It is clear and understandable. It requires that a person is disciplined. Again, disciplined. And once again, disciplined. Whatever you take, everything requires discipline. Why? Discipline is required in everyday life. This is really so. You might get too distracted and forget about the spiritual. Discipline is required in relationships with other people. Why? You start hunting for other people's attention and forget about your own spiritual development, right? Meanwhile, we all chase after other people's attention. On the spiritual path, other people's attention is secondary. At first, yes, it's important. Like for any monkey, I'll put it this way. But when a person becomes a human, when he indeed already begins to feel a response from the spiritual world, he doesn't need other people's attention. Let's say, it no longer plays any role for him. Why? Because I'll say it again. It is future subpersonalities that hunt for attention, for the attention of others. An angel doesn't need other people's attention. So when a person strives to become an angel, he strives for God's love, but not for the attention of other people. This is very important, friends, and it clearly puts everything in its place. You see how simple everything really is?
Yes.
The spiritual path is the simplest and easiest path, but it requires discipline. Yet, in order to have discipline, we should have willingness. And for us to have willingness and not to wobble in any direction, we should clearly determine our goal. Then we will strive for it, right?
And improve.
And you should realize whether you need it or not, or you actually want to be a subpersonality, whether you are a slave of shaitan or an angel. A person chooses.
And the best care for one's neighbor is first of all to
One's own spiritual growth.
steadfastly go towards the spiritual world.
That's right. If you want to help your other half or friend, it doesn't matter who, but you want to help them spiritually, develop spiritually yourself. That's when a person who is next to you will feel. He will definitely feel your spiritual growth. Well, and nobody canceled mirror neurons. That's how we can help. As for preaching that you are right or wrong now, well, a simple elementary thing. A spouse comes from work, sits down, keeps silent, and frowns. And his spouse says, "What's wrong?"
What are you thinking about?
Who are you thinking about?
Who are you thinking about?
Yes.
Yes.
What thoughts do you have? Do you want to run away already, to destroy the nest that I've built, right? Meaning, that's already an attack on what? On a woman's selfishness. There's already no place for the spiritual here. He has already thought up something, right? Does she want to get into his head?
She does.
She wants.
Consciousness.
While a man comes and simply rests, just rests. Why is he sad? Well, he has such a face. His muscles are relaxed and she perceives, out of fear, that he is sad. He has come home unhappy, right? Such a threat. Well, everything is simpler, in fact. Right?
Igor Mikhailovich, does jealousy disappear on the spiritual path? You've said, what are you thinking about? Who are you thinking about? What is jealousy from the perspective of the work of consciousness?
What is jealousy? I'll put it this way. A person becomes jealous of another person out of fear. It is really out of fear. A person is afraid that he will lose this contrived status of alpha, you know? Every person in the family considers himself to be the alpha, that he is in charge, that he dominates or manipulates, and so on. And jealousy precisely indicates that the other half, let's say, might have been tempted by someone. Hence, that someone the other half has been tempted by is more of an alpha. This is simply selfishness, friends, nothing more. Isn't it so?
Yes, exactly.
And does jealousy disappear on the spiritual path? What is actually the spiritual path? Let's sort this out too, because we've been saying a lot. The spiritual path is a certain road. Let's put it associatively, on which we've embarked and we are trying to follow it. But then we immediately turn from the road for a flower, for a mushroom, some people for business, others for a beer, some for a fishing trip, and so on. And we often forget about that path, whereas the true spiritual path is a leap. It is not a road. And that's where all the mundane things disappear. They become secondary. And you start treating it more reasonably. You see, that is, if your other half becomes tempted by someone, he or she has the right to make a personal choice. If this actually happened, a person is free and can go wherever he wants. I mean, a person who is truly spiritually free will never hold another person. Why? Because it's a choice. And here, you see, spiritual people understand very well what the freedom of choice is, and they are very well aware of what will happen if they oppose it. In other words, nothing good will come out of it. This is, in fact, an attack on human freedom. It is the will of a human. If he wants to go, he goes somewhere, right?
Violence against personality, yes.
Love cannot be forced. But here again, you see, in worldly life, for people, their egoism and pridefulness, which precisely are Shaitan's tools to manipulate a person, and jealousy is exactly a derivative of these two. Well, if a person frees himself from them on the spiritual path, he frees himself from everything. But we're already talking about the true spiritual path, which you and I have compared to a leap, right? It's a flight, without distractions or hesitations. As for the spiritual path, well, let's say the majority of people in this world stand on the spiritual path. Sometimes they go to temples, sometimes they remember God. Well, they have been standing on this path since childhood, and they go to no one knows where, right?
Why is it a long path for some people, while for others, the spiritual path is really a leap, a flight?
Because those for whom this path is long have no goal. They have no aspiration for God. They are manipulated by Shaitan. It's a person who is a pawn in Shaitan's hands, and he moves him around on his chessboard as he likes. So at this point, the notion we call fate, karma, and so forth is already formed. That is, when your next steps are predetermined, not by you, but when
your moves are calculated many steps ahead.
Certainly, but when you become free. And what is meant by freedom? Freedom from Shaitan, from his manipulations. Then you have the right to choose which step to take, and you have the right to live. And what is life? Life doesn't mean sunshine, say, beautiful flowers and good fishing. No, friends. Life in this world, as long as there's no ideal society here, is full of bustle and surprises. But that's a good thing, after all.
You're out of the system's game.
Right. And that's where even the system doesn't know what step you will take next. You see, it's already a surprise even for the system. Well, this leads to a lot of changes. Why? Because being in society, you as an individual bring chaos to the orderly ranks of the system, and the game is already unpredictable for it. So you create problems even for Shaitan. And this is very important, friends. Thus, you take away his energy, you divert his attention, giving other people a chance to take a deep breath. This is true.
The more there are spiritual people, the more there are glitches in the system.
The more there is love and freedom because of a glitch that is formed. So, my friends, everything is simple. The spiritual path is beautiful. It is really the best thing there can be. While everything starts with love. So, friends, let's just love each other. Right? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, friends.